Want to get started. Hi, I'm Victoria Alexander, and welcome to the summer edition of Buying into Brooklyn. This is a monthly course that we do to help educate buyers that are just starting out, to help them understand the buying process. It can feel really overwhelming and confusing, and I think there's a lot of, sales tactics that are used. So I'd like to help educate people so they feel empowered taking the first step so that they end up with a stress-free experience, supportive team, and a great home buying experience. And that's why I work with John and Catherine. Oh, I started hearing an echo. Hmm. In this, because I think having the expertise, talking to all of us is better than trying to call each one of us up and, have three different conversations. It feels one-stop shop. You're going to be able to learn the overarching view of the process, and then hear from each of the experts here that you'll need as your team member to start this process. So this is annoying. I'm going to close this, turn off note taker. The other things that there is a chat right here. You can leave any questions you have here, or if it's an appropriate time, you can just jump on off and ask us anything. We're happy to help. And then we will send you a bunch of resources afterwards so you can share with whoever you have in the decision-making process that you want to educate. You'll be able to, we'll put this on YouTube so you can watch it later, and also on Spotify if you want to just listen to it and not necessarily have to see our faces. And there'll be lots of other resources we share too about first steps so that you're prepared to do that. Do not let the internet choose who to work with for you. You want to make a conscious decision and be intentional about who your team members are. John, do you want to give you a little intro before we get started? And same Catherine? John, you go first.
Sure. Yeah, John Lundholm, Quintessential Mortgage. I'm a broker, or work with a broker, I should say. And so I've been doing lending for quite a while, and I take a little bit of a different approach. Everybody's kind of got uh, um, the rates and the products and everything. We're always pretty competitive on that, but I like to give a different experience and do a lot of emotional management. The process of buying a home can be very overwhelming, particularly in New York, where people tend to be very in command of most things in their lives. And then you jump into the home buying process and it's a little chaotic and out of control, and everybody's picking through your world. So having the right team holding your hand and giving you the guidance and answering the questions and communication and follow-up and all of those different things make just an absolute tremendous amount of difference. People often think of mortgage as a commodity, where one lender is the same as any other, and it is far, far from that. So it really is key to have the right people in your corner, and I try to be that person as often as possible.
Great. Catherine, you want to jump on in?
Hi, guys. My name is Catherine Marrero. So nice to meet you. I am a residential transactional real estate attorney. I am based in New York City, right across the street from Grand Central, so very convenient. Outside of that, I do work with representing buyers, lenders, sellers, investors from inception through closing. My practice is centered around helping clients navigate themselves through the process. I am one that prides myself on responsiveness, goal oriented, proactive, solutions oriented. So I am there with you from the beginning till the end, holding your hand, answering all questions that you guys need. But again, my goal is to just make the entire process as smooth as it can be. And I definitely just look forward to helping you guys now, but also just providing any practical tips that are needed as we move along.
Great. So I'm trying to figure out where I scroll here. Oh, here we go. This is what I should have had up when we were talking, but we're here now. So, and like I said, I'm Victoria Alexander. I'm the owner broker of Realty Collective that I've owned for 21 years, which is wild to say out loud because I don't feel that old, but been doing this for a long time. And my job is literally to guide you through this process. That's the role of the real estate broker, to hold your hand, to help you have, a sounding board, a therapist to talk you through. This is like the biggest decision most people ever make in their life is real estate. And you should do it with somebody that has gone through this, especially as a first-time home buyer. This is the sort of expertise you need to take these steps and feel confident that you're doing it correctly. Otherwise, I know that that's how you end up second guessing yourself, also maybe overpaying, and just having some missteps that in hindsight, somebody maybe could have helped you avoid making. And that's why it's important to have these experts on your team, right? You want somebody that is going to use their expertise to say, okay, this is how it normally goes and what I would do here, rather than you try to figure it out on your own, right? And I think that a lot of people, there's been some ambiguity about what the role of the buyer's broker is with all the changes, and especially across the country. But in New York City, in most cases, the seller is still paying the real estate broker because they know that this is a complex process. Rarely do we have come across situations where the seller doesn't want to pay a buyer's broker, because they know, especially with co-ops, like there's a board approval, there's all these different things, and they want to make sure that whoever they pick, they're going to get across the finish line. So that's why people are still, very much working with real estate brokers to help them purchase here, at least in New York City. The rest of the country, things are and we're going to only give you advice about what happens here because that's where we are expertise in. And this is also not comprehensive, right? We're going to give you an overview of the process, but there's so much information. And I also have created a book called the Buying into Brooklyn ebook that we'll share afterwards. So if you do want to go into a deeper dive on anything, you have the resources at your fingertips. Okay, so next slide is why buy now? Okay. You can all assume why I'm going to tell you, but is the rent's too damn high. I have an apartment right now for $10,000 in Williamsburg, and I can't imagine how many people I was shocked how many people applied for this apartment and are considering not buying. And I always say if you're going to be planning on staying in New York City for at least the next 5 years, you should make sure that your money is going somewhere and not just into somebody's pocket, because you are paying somebody's mortgage. It's either your own or your landlord's. You get to have your own design. You're making a lot, an investment in yourself, and you're building equity over time. So, if you are staying in New York City, that's where you start, I would say, then you should consider buying. And then I am going to send it in a follow-up email after this. We have a rent to buy matrix that's provided by the New York Times, and you can specifically put in your rent and all of your other financial calculations to say, okay, well, is buying really for you? If you're in a rent stabilized or rent controlled apartment, it might not make sense to do that. But that's why we have a calculator to help you figure out what those financials could really be. So be on the lookout. In the follow-up email to this class, we will be sending that out. Okay. Everybody always starts on Zillow or StreetEasy or Realtor.com. Don't start there. If you are serious about buying, what you want to do is prepare. And first step in preparation, I always say, is building your team. And, some people just start by calling their bank and being like, oh, can I get a loan? I always say it's more important. The bank that you work with isn't necessarily going to give you the best rate, because they're going to only offer you products that you have. That's why I always encourage you to talk to someone like John, who's a mortgage broker, and that gets to give you different products based on your specific situations, not just the products they have. And that they're going to give you something called a pre-approval. And with that in your hand, you are armed to actually go out and look at things that fit within your financial criteria. And what happens when you go out and start looking at things? Well, everybody underestimates how quickly they fall in love with stuff. And if you don't have your lawyer worked out, you are going to lose out on that apartment, because you need to be prepared and have your professional team, that people that are going to guide you through this, ready to go. So you're not making decisions based on pressure or stress or time. You want to be thoughtful. You have to talk to these people a lot, and you want to make sure that they're communicating information to you in a digestible way, and that you like and trust them, and they're going to listen to their professional opinions. So that's why it's super important that you build your team. And so I was just talking about how important it is to get your pre-approval letter. And that's where I'm going to hand things off to John, because there's a lot of things that come into this. If you work for yourself, sometimes you're not ready to buy right now because you work for yourself and you've been putting your tax returns in a certain way, but there might be a better way to do that. And you should talk to John to make sure that the bank is going to like what they see when they look at your paperwork. And it might take some time to clean that stuff up. So John, you want to talk to about what happens on the first call when somebody jumps on with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So couple of things I just say off the top when it comes to the mortgage side of things. One is that it is never too early. If you are even
100% agree.
casually considering buying at some future point, 6 months out, 12 months out, 2 weeks out, have the conversation sooner than later. The conversation with me, at least, I'll walk through a lot of the ins and outs of the financing specific to you. And lending is both very complicated and very simple if you make it. Everybody's finances are completely different. So we'll walk through your specific scenarios, what the options are for you, what are the different levers that you can move around. And why I say it's never too early is if that does not get you where you want to go today, we can also develop a plan and put you on a roadmap that will get you there in X amount of time. So it's never too early. I would also say don't ever second guess yourself out of it. There are a lot of ways to do a mortgage. There's a lot of ways to get it approved. There's lots of different structures. Banks may only have a couple of different options. As a broker, we work with dozens of different lending institutions. So we have all of your standard classic Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, VA, those types of options. We also do a lot of what are called non-QM loans that are a little bit outside of the box. So if you're newly self-employed, or if you are buying investment properties, or you're doing all sorts of different funky stuff, construction loans, all these different things, we have options for lots of different ways to get things done. And so don't talk yourself out of it and think that income or credit or anything is going to disqualify you. There's a lot of ways to make it happen. The other one is work with someone who you are comfortable with, who answers the questions that you need answered, who seems to have the knowledge, who seems to have the cadence and the communication style and the patience and whatnot. You know, if you love to text message, find someone who's okay with text messaging. If you love to email or have long conversations or do Zoom calls for everything, you want to find people who can work with your style, because this is a very heavy process a lot of times. And so you want to be plugged into the right people. Now, as for the actual qualifying of it, the mortgage is basically a loan against your future income. So your income is really the crux of everything. And then it is backed by a piece of property. So finding the right property, which Victoria helps you with, is the next big key. And then credit history is how well you've paid people back in the past. So we'll take a look at that. And it is important to have the better the credit, the better the options. And also the more variety and the more credit history you have, also that helps too. Again, lots of options there though. And then the last piece is assets, which sets out how much you can put as a down payment. New York is a very different place, very different market from a lot of other places. The closing costs are completely different. There's mortgage taxes and mansion taxes and all these different things. And there's co-ops, which are different from condos and houses, and lots of different pieces to the puzzle. So again, the key is have the conversation and don't feel like you have to learn it all yourself. Just feel free to lean on an expert like me, and I'll walk you through all of your questions so that you don't have to go Googling and chat GPTing. A lot of times those are great resources, but if you don't know the right questions to ask, you can miss out on a lot of really critical information. Even though you get the answers, you may not get all of the answers you need or the right answers to the question specific to you or the right answers to New York. So again, experts matter a lot. So when you call the mortgage, we'll walk through the basics. We'll set forth your pre-approval. That gives you a good idea of what you can do, how much you can buy, and what you can change to make that number move around. And it also gives the sellers a good idea, which is possibly even more important, so that when you go and bid, you have a better chance of winning. New York is more competitive right now than a lot of other places in the country. So you may hear that people are negotiating prices and things like that. It's a lot less common in New York right now. Victoria, again, can talk more to that, but you want to have all of your ducks in a row to give yourself the best shot. New York, in a lot of ways, is a very competitive place. Not surprising to anyone. So you want to put your best foot forward and have everything lined up so that you can make moves. And you never know when you'll find a place, whether it's this week or in 6 months, you want to be ready to move. So that's always the first thing, is to walk through, field all your questions, talk about anything that you're nervous about. Are you worried you're going to make a mistake and it's going to cost you a ton of money? Talk to me about that. If you're worried about your income, your assets, any of this sort of stuff, talk to me about it and we'll sort it out and tell you what you can do.
Great. And I always like to tell everybody it's so important that you hire New York City experts. You know, everybody talks about, oh, well, Quicken and Rocket Mortgage, there's these platforms. New York City real estate is more complicated than anywhere else in the country, especially when it comes to co-ops. That's where you need a real person that understands what's happening here on the ground. And same thing with lawyers. Don't hire your uncle that, you know, is also a divorce attorney and he's in Illinois and he's not going to charge you any money. You get what you pay for, and you want somebody that understands the ins and outs of this industry from a New York City perspective. So you want somebody that's a lawyer that's doing transactions for real estate as their bread and butter every day. They have the know-how and the knowledge to make sure you get to the closing table, and they're not going to step out of line of what their duties are in the deal. Everybody's sometimes in a deal, something happens, and it's like, oh, we have to negotiate that. And lawyers know that's the broker's job, and they kick it back to me. In some cases, when the person doesn't know what their role is because they're not a New York City mortgage lawyer, they overstep, and that can put a lot of different things in jeopardy. And so that's why you want expertise on the ground for New York City specifically when it comes to your team members. And that's us across the board. It doesn't have to be us. I hope you know you are encouraged by the information we're giving you and feel confident and want to work with us. But really, this is advice across the board. Please do not shoot yourself in the foot and hire somebody that is going to steer you astray and make this our whole job is to try to make this as seamless and stress-free as possible. We all know how stressful New York City real estate can be, even just in renting apartments. So try to make sure you pick people that are confident, educated, have been doing this a long time. Don't hire your friend that just got into law, just got their mortgage license, just got their real estate license. You want people that have a long track record and have proven that they can withstand the ups and downs of the real estate market. So I also encourage you then to talk to a lawyer. I know that most people don't want to this early on because it seems like, oh, well, we're just looking at property. You want to make sure you know who you want to work with. So Catherine, can you tell us a little bit about what people you like to communicate on the first call and what people should ask maybe in the first initial call?
Okay, that's a great thing to talk about. So for me personally, I love to have my intro call with whomever is going to be involved in the buying process. Sometimes I will say that I will have first time home buyers who do have people who will be on the loan but not on title. So I do always suggest having all people on the call just so that everybody's sort of on the same page. I will say the buying process has gotten a lot more creative. And I know, John, you can speak to that because again, financially, sometimes you just need additional financial support, and that's not a bad thing. It's a great thing to have when you have people who are in your corner who will help you financially, but it's just making sure that everybody's on the same page of what the intention is and how holding title is going to look. And then obviously having the conversation of if people are going to be on title, if not, just getting into that. But that being said, the first call, I like to just talk about what it is that we're looking to buy. When we talk about property types, already that in and of itself is going to guide the conversation. So if we're going to be talking about buying a home versus talking about buying cooperatives versus talking about buying condominiums, we are having three separate different conversations. When you're buying your single family home, we're really just going to be logistically looking at inspections and then financially what your criteria is, right? We don't have third party people like management or the HOA or the board that are going to get involved and be looking at your financials. Whereas when we're working with cooperatives or condominiums, we do have now a third party who's going to be looking to approve you as home buyers. The contract going in for all these kinds of properties has different contingencies in place. So when we're buying a single family home, we're not looking for approval or a right of first refusal waiver from a condominium or the board denying your board application. For a home, it's strictly just about you financially qualifying, getting your commitment letter, and being able to move all the way to clearing the file for closing with your lender. When we are working within the co-op and the condo world, this is where Victoria and I would be really walking hand in hand throughout the whole transaction. Because again, just between contract signing and getting to closing, you're going to be working on your board application, which is extremely important. And getting that down perfectly the first time is also important because it affects your timeline to closing, right? So everybody has an intention of how quickly they want to close, how easily they want to close, and it's just about getting you there. So on the first call, we're just going to talk about what it is that you're looking to buy, who's looking to be on title, financially what you're looking to put down. In New York City, the custom is 10%, but sometimes that is negotiated to a little less depending on what your negotiability is. Outside of that, we also talk about what the intention is of how you want to use the property. Are you using it as your primary residence? Because you're a first-time home buyer, is this going to be where you will primarily reside? Is it a second home? Is it an investment property? This all, again, influences buying power, but also what type of transaction we're moving forward with. It also influences the kind of approvals that you will get if you're going into this with board approvals, right? Because again, we also need to review within due diligence period, are they allowed to do sublets? Are you allowed to own as an investment property? Do you have to live there 2 years before you can sublet the property? There are a lot of requirements in terms of owning property in New York, and it's just about making sure that before you sign on the dotted line and put down your contract deposit, you do know for a fact the property you're entering into to buy is the best suited for you. And it's making sure you have all the information at your fingertips so that when you sign, you know, okay, I have every single ounce of information I can need to make this informed decision. And we three are the ones that got you there. And that's the most important part about all of this. If you do have any other questions, obviously feel free to put them in the chat. And then I will also put my contact information in there. So if you just wanted to butt me for a call and just ask for little tips on anything that I just spoke about, because it is a lot of information, it is overwhelming, but that's what we're here for. We're here to make it as stress-free as possible. So obviously just let me know.
Thanks for that. So, okay, now that you've got assembled your team, you're ready, right? So you're ready to buy. So what are the things that we talk about on our first calls? Sort of like your strategy. Where we start with is timing. What's your timeline? Do you have a lease that's running out? Do you have family conditions or budget constraints that you want to talk about? Maybe you can get pre-approved for more, but you're only comfortable, purchasing at a certain price. Maybe you have a monthly cap on how much you're willing to spend on both the mortgage and the maintenance. So you want to make sure that even if we find something in the price point, that the maintenance can't be more than a certain amount, right? Because you're only comfortable at this amount. So we really talk about a strategy for you. Or do you have to leave the neighborhood you're in now? Or do you want to leave the neighborhood you're in now? These are the things that we talk about to then set us up for the actual search. Because knowing what constraints you have is an important part of the search process, and to know how fast we have to move, right? If you're like, lease is up in 3 months, we got to get on it. If you have a year on your lease, okay, and you don't want to feel rushed, you have a lot of other things going on, but I'm here to support you, and we're going to do things at your pace based on the things you tell me. And based on what you're comfortable with as well. So we establish something called a strategy. Then after that, we go into searching, right? And so after we've established that you're ready to hit the market, we talk about aligning what you're looking for with the neighborhoods and building amenities and types that exist out there in the real world. So some people who maybe don't live in the neighborhood they're in now, or have a rental that fits the criteria, but it's harder to find sales that fit the criteria they're looking for, might have to make a switch on neighborhood, right? So we talk about what sort of amenities, start with location. Then after you tell me the location, then we start telling me about the things that you want the location, the property to have, and then we see if it lines up. So, because if you want to be in new construction with a gym in the building and lots of amenities and an elevator, we're probably not looking in Cobble Hill Carroll Gardens, probably not looking in Brownstone Park Slope, right? We're probably looking in Gowanus, Williamsburg, downtown Brooklyn. Those are new construction neighborhoods that have big buildings, that have lots of amenities, that have elevators, that have roof decks, that have gyms in the building, have washer dryer. So based on the location, then we're going to narrow down, okay, can you actually find what you're looking for in the neighborhood you want to be? And if you can't, then I start suggesting and talking to you about, okay, what neighborhoods do have what you want? And can you afford it, right? Because maybe you're in a neighborhood now that it is affordable, but there's not that many that line up, and you might have to make a change and not be aligned exactly where you are. But I feel like this is part of figuring out what is really important to you. And, maybe you need to save up a little more. Maybe you need to say, okay, you know what? This is in line. The 5 things that I always tell people like are your deal breakers. Maybe you're gonna have to say, okay, I can live without having a gym in the building because the place that I like is close to all those amenities and I'm right by the subway. So I can just, on my way home from work, stop and go to the gym on the way back. So next slide. Where do you search? Okay, we set you up in our backend database, but I have to say there's some really forward-facing consumer databases that I really like working with. StreetEasy is one of them. The other one is homes.com. They have some really fine-tuned search criteria. But the biggest thing is to make sure you are not on things like Zillow. Zillow confuses co-ops and condos. It's owned StreetEasy, so I don't know why they have such a mismatch of the information and they're not feeding each other. I would say Redfin, Realtor.com, also not great with giving you the details. If you are totally against and can't buy in a co-op, there's a lot of reasons that could happen, and we can go into the different property types a little bit if anybody's interested. But I would say that you want to make sure that you're getting the correct information so you don't get excited about a property and then realize, oh, I can't buy in a co-op because my debt to income ratio is too high and I'm not going to pass a co-op board interview.
Yeah, and Victoria, just
Go
to
ahead.
throw a quick thing,
Throw it in, John.
interestingly, New York is a little bit different than most of the country. Most of the country, you'll have the centralized multiple listing service,
Yeah.
MLS. New York does not have that. And traditionally, it was all just each agency would have their own little book of properties. And Street Easy kind of created a almost version of an MLS. So this is one of the reasons why it's a little bit funkier in New York as you look around, and Street Easy is one of the better resources, but also having someone who has been doing it for a while and knows where to look and knows where to find everything is also very, very helpful.
Then what happens is we think about okay, yes. So thanks, John, for pointing that out. I was going to say something when you were saying that, and then I lost my train of thought. So, but okay, so say you're on the platforms, you found the right property, we go and take a look at it, you fall in love, and you're ready to make an offer. Okay, and that's why it's so important that you do your homework, because not only am I giving you the homework of assembling your team, when we start working together, I have you pre-fill out some paperwork so that you just need to plug in information. People want a cover letter. You need to put in the revenue submit offer form. You definitely need to have your pre-approval from John. And then we send over a nice little package that I put my own personal touch on a letter to the other broker to put in the offer. And we talk about, okay, what's the offer going to be? I help you look at some in-building and neighborhood comps for us to get there. I also call the broker and have a conversation with them. And that's why it's so important that you work with people that are industry experts. When I would say this year, almost every deal I've done is with a broker that I've known for more than a decade. And being able to call them and have a conversation about what makes sure that, my client's being competitive. And I think that there is some value really for them because they've done deals with me before that they're like, oh, I know that Victoria is going to make sure that everything gets done and it's going to get done to my liking and my standard. And she's going to be someone I can communicate with in a way that a new person that I don't have rapport with, they can't, right? It's different if you've never talked to this before. People are people. But if I've already had, know somebody really well, it's really great to be able to like, okay, I'm going to call the broker and like, they're going to like, just tell me how it is. So I think that's super important for when you're picking people to work with and for making sure that your offer is the most competitive it can be. And maybe you can't get there. Maybe you're like, okay, well, we're going to highest and best. And there's just somebody out there that's able to pay more, is willing to pay more. And we're not going to get the deal, but we can have a real frank conversation to figure that out and not feel like you're losing out because that person doesn't have the competitive edge of a relationship. We're going to get the answers. So we talked together about your comfort level, what that means, where I think you should go, and are you okay with, okay, if we don't get here, are you okay with losing the property if we're in a, multiple bidding situation? I also like to tell people, you know, a lot of buyers call me and they're like, well, that's been on the market forever. I'm like, okay, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with the property. It means somewhere along the line, something happened and we need to figure out what that is. Maybe there is something wrong with the property, but maybe the seller was stubborn out the gate and overpriced it. They put it on the market at the wrong time of the year, or this year has been a really crazy year. The spring market came very early, disappeared, and then came back again. It's been not a normal year for sure. A lot of things outside and globally have affected the interest rates, have affected people's confidence. So don't discount properties that have been on the market a while, and they actually give you more leverage in your offer strategy because you don't have 10 other people that are coming to the one open house on Sunday to be leveraged against, right? So you're in a better position to be able to negotiate. So that's what we talk about, when we're putting in the offer. Then hopefully what we do is get your offer accepted, and that starts the next phase of the process. Next phase of the process, the brokers are creating something called a deal sheet that outlines the terms that we've agreed to, right? They're going to make some repairs, or they're selling it as is. They want a longer contract time. It's going to come with the painting on the wall that they really love. What else the price is going to be discounted. They're going to pay a year of the common charges or a year of the assessment that is on the property. These are the things that we try to negotiate before we send the deal sheets to the lawyers. Okay, but then the deal sheets go to the lawyers. Deal sheets go to the lawyers, and that triggers their due diligence. On my end still, we are then quickly trying to get, I also am telling John, right? I'm like, John, we have an accepted offer on this property. Can you check for any red flags? Because the last thing we want to find out is that there's something wrong in the back end. And when he's checking and there's a red flag on this property and we're not going to be able to get the loan because too many renters are in the building, because it was flagged that their finances aren't great or something like that. So we want to make sure that there isn't any red flags. Usually there aren't, but it's important you do our due diligence and make sure, because last thing we want to do is go for 3 months of being in contract to have it all fall apart for something we could have resolved out the gate. So I'm trying to schedule the inspection with you. I have a list of inspectors. I always say, try and find an inspector that shows up and explains to you the mechanics of your building. As first-time homebuyers, and even as myself when I bought my house, I wish somebody explained things better to me about the things I was buying, actually how the things function, the heating, the air conditioning, the materials of the wall. Those are important so that you don't make mistakes like I did and didn't turn off the water on my roof and the pipes burst in the winter. And that was an expensive mistake that I could have avoided. So you want an inspector that not only is looking for everything, but then explaining to you and educating you about how they work. And so, okay, so while we're doing the inspection and the lawyer's waiting for me to say, oh, all clear on the inspection, Catherine's been doing some due diligence. So Catherine, why don't you talk about the due diligence that you do for when the deal sheets go out?
So, due diligence usually takes place when we are walking through condominiums or co ops. Due diligence doesn't really apply when we're buying single family homes on my end. That's more just us looking at the inspection report. Due diligence for co ops and condominiums basically work where we are reviewing minutes from the board. The minutes from the board usually give us a lot of information or give us no information. Minutes are meetings that are held by the board when they talk about any improvements, projects, issues, arrears, financial instability, anything that's going on within the building that any shareholder would want to know about, any notices, any maintenance increases, any assessment increases, any of those will be talked about within the minutes. I always go to read them roughly red are the last 2 to 3 years, and I take notes and I send them to any potential purchasers. Additionally, I also send questionnaires that are provided by myself, but also I like to send the lender questionnaire, and I like to send the lender questionnaire in anticipation of contract signing as part of due diligence, so that because we already have the bank that we know that we're working with ahead of time, we can then position ourselves so that once we receive the questionnaire, then immediately I send it to the lender. So before even signing, the lender can tell me if there's any red flags that have come up, so that throughout due diligence, I know if the purchaser has a very good, just a very good position with financing, or if there's just going to be any issues once we get under contract. So due diligence roughly takes 7 to 10 business days. I try to amp it up to at least, if I can on my end, 3, because again, the one running theme with any deal is time kills all deals. So it's remembering that the sooner we get through due diligence, the better, because again, you have an accepted offer, but just because you have an accepted offer doesn't mean that that property is not being shown through and through, and that higher offers and better offers can come through while I'm in my due diligence period. I've had it happen firsthand. It's an unfortunate thing. It's the worst thing that an agent wants to tell you when you've put an offer in and your heart skips a beat because you're like, this is it. This is the property. And then you lose it because due diligence wasn't done quick enough. Management companies, they do like to take their time with responses. So I will say that management companies are my biggest friend but foe when it comes to due diligence processes, because you always are making sure that you keep them in your back pocket and you keep them happy and graceful, but also pressuring them to get things done as quick as possible. So I will say due diligence is not the easiest thing to understand by purchasers, because in their eyes they're like, well, great, I found a property, let's get into contract, let's sign. And as much as I'd love to say yes to that, you kind of have to think about it as it's sort of like a marriage, a union between you and the building. And it's making sure that when you are moving forward with buying into a building, it's making sure that they are financially stable, secure, that not only your finances are great, but that the building is financed and greatly financed, and making sure that whoever is running the building knows what they're doing. A lot of the board positions are voluntary, and a lot of people don't know that. Board positions can be taken by any shareholder if they're voted in. So board positions are something where you learn as you go, or maybe you take what you know from the jobs that you work and use that to your advantage to help run the building. But it's also just remembering that these people are just like any other people who are running a building, learning about what it means to run a building. So just as Victoria was like, oh, you want an inspector that wants to educate you, you want the board to function the same. You want a board to sort of be able to explain to you how the building is running, explain to you how they are using the funds. You want to make sure they're not mismanaging, misusing funds, because at the end of the day, your maintenance, your common charges, whatever assessments are being implemented, it's about seeing patterns, the greater good. It's about seeing, okay, do these people know how to manage the building? If the boiler were to break, if there's an elevator modernization that's needed, those are just 2 things off the top of my head. It's looking to see, okay, does the building have reserves? Does the building know what it means to manage money correctly in the event bad things happen? And the reason I bring that up is because the last thing any shareholder wants to read as a notice is your maintenance just went up 20% because there's not enough money to cover items that will come up. So within due diligence, it's just about making sure, is this the right fit for me? And overhead carrying costs, do I have what I need to carry myself through should increases, exist? And if I see there's a trend with a building that we're looking at 5% increases every year, are you prepared for that? Financially, can you take that on? And it's just having that honest conversation with you guys, because just as important as it is finding the right property for you, it's also just making sure that not only on paper, surface level, and after inspection, is it the right property, but financially, again, that's just the conversation to have. Is this the right property for you? So in a nutshell, I would say that's good due diligence all around.
Yeah. And John, do you want to just talk about when I'm triggering and telling you that we're, have an accepted offer on a building, what you look for?
Yeah, yeah. I always like to take that opportunity to get ahead on the paperwork. The due diligence thing, I will say, is one of the many things that New York does differently. In a lot of places, when you put in an offer, your offer is a contract. And when someone accepts the offer, they countersign the contract and you're in contract. In New York, you put in an offer, they accept the offer, you're still not in contract. You do the due diligence, you negotiate the contract, then you sign the contract, then they sign the contract. And anywhere along there, someone else could come in and put in another offer. So Kathy mentioned it is very important to move that quickly. You want to do the due diligence, but you want to do it quickly. So as for what I will do at that point, I will get with the client, talk about the specifics of the specific offer, the contract, the price, and what the documentation will need at that point. And we'll collect bank statements and pay stubs. We might do an updated credit check, tax returns, whatever kind of documents, depending on what you're doing, depending on your financials. And then we'll gather everything together so that as soon as the contracts are signed, we can hit the ground running. One of the nice things in the broker world is we're pretty fast. We will get approvals in days. Most of the bank side will get approvals in weeks. So we knock out a lot of the question marks, knock out a lot of the risk very early on. So you get your answers quickly, you get your commitment letters quickly, and you don't have to worry about getting approved. So that's that period leading up to the contract signing. Once the contract is signed, that's when you really need to get started. And then we can start talking about things like rate locking and timelines and when do you want to close. Incidentally, closing is another thing that New York does differently. In most places, a closing date is a closing date. In New York, a closing is at best a mild suggestion. You will almost never close on your closing date in the contract. It's what's called an on or about date. And the way the closings in New York work is that you basically get everything done and then decide on a closing date. Very strange. But the other, I had written a note here that I wanted to touch on. Oh, on the rate side of things also, that's where we'll start to talk about that. The rates are specific to the purchase, so the property, the amount you're putting down, the type of property, how long you need the rate lock for, et cetera. Rate locks can be really confusing if you don't really know them, which is one reason a lot of people kind of talk to their bank because they're comfortable with their bank, and that's fine. And you get their take on things and they'll tell you what they can do. But I say at the very least, if you're not talking to a broker first, you should at least talk to a broker second, because shopping the rates yourself is very risky. It's a recipe for disaster, frankly, because they're very convoluted and complex. So as a broker, we work with lots of different lenders. And so we can take that and shop it around for you. So then you have your bank that you talk to, and then you have the broker, which surveys kind of the rest of the field. And then you figure out what's your best opportunity there. And then we begin the underwriting process and the review, and you start working on your board packages and you start working on the appraisals and all of the rest of the fun and exciting parts.
The fun and exciting parts, yeah. So if the due diligence, Catherine does all this and everything looks good, she's going to say, okay, I don't see any major red flags, or she's going to explain any red flags she does see and explain the risk to you. And then you have to be comfortable with the risk, right? And then you're going to sign the contract. I think one of the things that people make a little bit of a misstep on is that I communicate, have your 10% transferred and ready to send. And I think that can delay us another couple days, and that always puts you at risk for having somebody swoop in and put another offer. And or your lawyer, like if you don't have the lawyers that are on our list of people that are qualified and preferred to work with, and they drag their feet, another offer can come in. Just happened with the deal that I had on Hick Street. I'm representing the seller. Another offer came in over the weekend, cost them $10,000 because they had to come up on their offer, or else we were going to possibly put the deal at risk with the buyer we had now, because somebody came in and that was a lot of money for a $500,000 apartment for them to leave on the table. So everybody, we met in the middle, had them come up and meet us there. But if their lawyer had moved quickly, they would have already been assigned their side of the contract and might not have had to put, spend that amount of money to stay competitive. So it's important that you move quickly and have your money ready to go, and listen to your advisors to make sure that you're doing everything in your power to not risk losing the property that you've worked so hard for months to find and fall in love with. So make sure you're on top of that. So once we sign the contract and you send your deposit, then my advice is always get everything to the bank. Don't worry about anything else that's going on. This most important thing you need to do is get the information to the bank so that they can do the rest of the due diligence, which is the underwriting, and make sure that they're going to be able to give you the loan. Especially in a co-op, we could not submit your board package until we have the commitment letter. That means the bank needs to have everything they need to give you the commitment letter and the Aztec agreements to submit the co-op package. We don't start working on the co-op package until you have everything to the bank. So I usually do wait a couple days, start going over everything so that you're not getting an email from me and from John saying, get all this in a row, because the priority is John. Then we'll start working on your co-op package, getting your reference letters, doing your financial sheet. It is a lot of work. It feels really intrusive. It is antiquated, and sometimes they are using an online platform like Domicile, which makes things really easy. Or sometimes they want you to us to put everything in a beautiful PDF and print it out and hand deliver 300 plus pages of paperwork that will end up going in the shredder. So and it's not a sign that there's something wrong with the board, that they're still doing things on paper. It just means that they might be focused on other things, and what is doing now is working for them. Isn't a huge building. Why put time and energy into changing something that is only a burden on the people that are buying? So then also the lawyers are running title and doing their due diligence on the back end there. So this is really when you guys shine and are your turn times and getting everything aligned, because I'm sort of just working on the board package if it's a co-op, and not if it's a condo some condos have board packages, but they're very light in comparison to a co-op package. So John, Catherine, tell us, what's happening now. We're getting to the closing table. Take us there.
So once we are basically almost getting to the closing table, our biggest thing is just making sure what's outstanding for a lender clear to close, and any items that are needed from the buyer on that, any final documentation, verification of employment, making sure you're still employed. I've had buyers in the past who forget that if you lose your job, you're kind of also putting yourself at risk for closing, but I'll just say that here. Please make sure you're still employed. And then just also making sure that you have all of the money that you need in order to close. So as we get closer to closing, we're going to start working on your closing statements. We're going to make sure title is clear. When I say title is clear, it's just making sure that if there were any open permits on the property, if it was a single family home and they were the seller's responsibility to clear and get signed off on. Okay, where are we with that? Checking in on status for that. If it's within the condominium and co-op, just making sure you've been board approved and making sure we have the waiver of right of first refusal for condominiums. As we're getting closer to the closing, now it's making sure that we have final numbers, making sure what costs are going to be needed and who parties are that are going to need to be paid. So as we get closer, the biggest thing I like to get asked is, all right, Kathy, how much money do I need for my closing? And that's a great question, because everybody would like to know what's that final number looking like. And I will obviously say that I think as you went into this, you have loan estimates and you have closing cost calculators and you have all of these things, all of these tools at your disposal that you were using to calculate on an estimate approximately what you were looking at with what your final number was going to be on closing day, right? So we always want to make sure that we're pretty much ballparked within there, but I always say take that with a fine tooth comb and just make sure that that was an estimate and it was never going to be that final number. I feel like sometimes maybe I get sticker shock from some people because they didn't take into account that maybe, especially for real property, their real estate tax just happens to be due when you're closing. And that's an additional thousands of dollars that just mentally wasn't accounted for. I just had clients who closed at the beginning of July and the July 1 taxes were due. And they were like, whoa, wait, this is way more than the closing costs that I had accounted for. And some people do allocate kind of to the penny what they believe they're going to need. And they did have to reach out for excess funds from other parties. You are qualified, but always remember to just keep having the conversation of what closing costs are going to look like and just keep asking. Doesn't hurt to ask. But again, it's just have a realization of what that day is going to look like, because I think the last thing anybody wants to hear is, I don't have enough money to close. You don't want to say that. So it's just making sure all across the board we are ready to get you there. And then once we do schedule you for guys for closing, then it's just making sure we have all parties there. If somebody isn't attending closing and somebody's going to sign on behalf of another person, it's making sure that we have original powers of attorneys ready for you guys. And then as far as anything else is concerned, that your rate is locked. That's a big one. Just making sure that you have that lined up. And then outside of that, just any other questions that you guys have on wrapping everything up to get you to the closing table, that's what we pretty much like to finalize. And then on the day of closing, we're looking at your final walkthrough. We're making sure that the way that we entered into contract, the inspection report that we saw when we first looked, making sure the property pretty much is a mirror image of the property you saw, pursuant to anything the seller had to repair. Was it repaired? Was it fixed? Pursuant to any issues coming out of the walkthrough. If anything is detrimental or you are looking at a property and you're like, whoa, what happened when they moved out? Obviously, that's a red flag. Now, okay, we have to start talking about credits, requests for money to be held back, maybe things like that. And those are tough conversations to have on the day of closing because you want everything to be pretty perfect and amazing and impeccable on the day that you close. But the realization sometimes is that we're all entering into this with people who are moving out and people forget to do things and, you know, people might be selling as they're buying, and because the seller might have a lot of moving parts, they'll forget that when they sign the contract they agree to fix XYZ, and then we get to closing day and you do your final walkthrough and then realize that the seller forgot to do things. So this is where we agree for credits and or escrow holdbacks. So these are also other conversations that Victoria and I have with you on the day of closing, and it is doable. And that's, again, at the end of the day, the goal is to get you closed. So it's always just making sure that we're having all these conversations actively, proactively, because the last thing any of us want to be is reactive to you guys. We want to make sure that we're having the conversations beforehand and not after you're being hit with the realization of what's going on, what happened, why don't you guys guide me better, right? And that's what we're trying to do. So
Nobody has ever said that to me. So why didn't you guide me better is not thing I've ever heard from a client. Maybe I want to just before it seems like we covered a lot there, Catherine. So we're almost there, guys. But someone did ask in the question, which Brian in the chat, would this be necessary for HDFC? Would things work differently for a mixed use building? So I'm not sure what this is for in reference to the HDFC, but for a mixed use building, depends on how many units it have. Mixed use being like a commercial with 2 apartments, or mixed use like it has a commercial with 100 apartments, are a little bit different. So Brian, you can take yourself off mute if you want to, and just, we can have a conversation if you're comfortable doing that. Otherwise, for who wants to take the HDFC question?
Uh,
Go for it.
Since on the HDFC's slightly different structure, it is a restricted purchase co-op, and it's the Housing Development Financing Corporation, which is a city entity. And they are sort of like half a rental, half a co-op. So you'll see them around sometimes with sort of shockingly low sticker prices compared to the rest of the market. That is because usually the building will have restrictions on sales price, so they don't appreciate like other property. They don't transact like other property, and they will usually have limits on their prices and or limits on the income requirements. Because they behave very differently, they also are very, very particular from a financing standpoint. And usually you can't just finance them anywhere. Each building will usually have a specific lender who will finance the units in that building as part of their meeting the needs of the community kind of requirements. So if you're looking at an HDC building, it is different than owning property. But happy to dive deeper on that with anybody if they'd like at some point. Mixed use, if you are buying, when Victoria says a 2/1, is basically if you're buying, say, a building on 4th Avenue or something like that that has 2 apartments above a commercial space and you're buying the building as a whole. That's a different story than if you're buying in a building that has a bunch of condos or co-op units above and then has retail on the ground level. in which case then it behaves more like a traditional co-op or condo, and that's all a part of the building's financials as an entity, which are sorted out in the overall building review. So trying not to get too granular there, but happy to sidebar a bunch of these too if anybody has additional questions.
Yeah.
To Kathy's point about wrapping up the financing stuff, getting ready for closing, the way that the underwriting works in the lending world is that we don't know your finances until we see what's on the paperwork. And the underwriters don't know your finances until they see what's on the paperwork. So the first round or two are where we tackle a whole bunch of the meat, and that's where we get to the commitment letters for the contract contingencies, where we'll have a whole bunch of new stuff and it's brand new and they have no idea what they're looking at. So they'll come back with follow-on questions. There's usually the first round, which is in the first few days. Then once the appraisal comes in and we get a couple of those questions answered, we do the second commitment letter, which is really the one where we knock out most of the questions. And then from that point, we're winding down, doing iterations of back and forth, knocking out minutia and following questions. And then also to the point on the closing costs. From the lending standpoint, there are a number of the closings in the lending world side of things that are fixed and cannot change. The things that can change are the things that are date sensitive or specific to the final terms of the transaction. So things like the number of days of interest that you'll pay at closing depends on what day of the month you close, or the number of months of property taxes that you'll pay into either the ESCO or to the county at closing depends on the tax cycle and when you're closing within it. So those things vary depending on when you close. And again, New York does not have a fixed closing date, so that's why those things can move around a little bit. Usually I'll have those conversations at a little bit more depth as we're going through the process, so none of it is really coming as a surprise, and you'll kind of have a pretty good handle on where to expect the numbers by the time you're getting there.
I think that we should make sure we're wrapping everything up. It is 6:01 and I know people want to go see who won the game. I had to walk away. If anybody wants to spoil it for me, I'm interested to know. I have not looked to see if Argentina beat England and see what the World Cup will be on Sunday. I want to thank everybody. So after John and Catherine do all this, the bank is giving you the clear to close. We do the final walkthrough. We're going to the closing table. You're gonna have all your money and ready to go. And you're gonna show up with a cashier's check, I know, and maybe your checkbook. I know you might need to get one of those to make sure you're covering incidentals. But then you get your keys. My other suggestion is always to do not schedule your move on the closing date. It makes the day incredibly stressful, and you want to take a minute because now you're gonna have to move. You have to do all of the things, set up new accounts, be a responsible adult. So let's try to, take it one step at a time and get through the closing and not move on the same day. I think that, am I forgetting anything? Anybody want to add in about the end of the line here?
The only thing I just wanted to circle back on the key of having the right team, and particularly in New York, where things are very strange, having the right team. Victoria mentioned at the top, and a couple people joined a little bit later. She's had her company for many years, and she's being modest here. Victoria's a ton of purchases and sales and rentals and things all over the city. We've worked together many times, and she's fantastic. She has resources out the wazoo, little ebooks and things, and fantastic. And then Kathy and her team, I've known them for a decade or two, I don't know, and also terrific. And, for my own little CV, I've been doing this for quite a while. I've probably done well into the billions of lending, of helping people with arranging loans, and have also bought and sold my own properties. I helped write the National Co-op Lending Guidelines at a top 5 lender at one point. So I know that stuff super duper well. So, you work with people that you are comfortable with, that you trust, that you think are going to take good care of you, that you mesh well with. There's a big personality element to it. But certainly I think that you'd be hard pressed to find a better team of experts for what that's worth.
Kathy, you want to add anything in before we jump off?
Honestly, just echoing what John just said, having the right team is such a big thing that you need. And I think you brought this up at the beginning. Don't just use somebody because they're convenient. Don't just use somebody because they happen to work in the area of the industry, have done one, and use people that know what they're doing, that will pick up the phone after 6 p.m. because they know truly how important this is to you. One thing I love to tell people is I don't discriminate based on career. If you need to talk at 8, 9 p.m., I think all of us here can speak freely in saying that we will pick up the phone. We will speak with you when it is and when it works for you, because we're not here to diminish your dream of home ownership. We're here to encourage it, and we're here to make sure that that's the end goal. So, with that being said, thank you all so much for listening, being a part of it. Whether you're starting, thinking about it, whatever it is, please understand that we are here for you. Any other questions, obviously, feel free to reach out. Do not be shy. A question is never dumb. I will always say that.
I 100%